Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and well, our reign as premiers is coming to an end. The dream of going back to back is officially over, and in 12 days' time, we will pass the crown onto a new champion. Joining me tonight to discuss how the wheels fell off the Demon juggernaut is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
I won't say good evening, Andy. It's not really a good evening. It's a better evening, I suppose, than the other night. But no more crystal ball gazing from here on in. Tonight we'll just be using the benefit of hindsight as we analyse our defeat by Brisbane last week.
Well, if we were going to use hindsight, could have used some of that hindsight with a bit of foresight, but obviously it doesn't work that way. Also joining us tonight to explain to us how the bookies got it all so wrong is our resident punter, Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. And I think, you obviously don't understand punting. One of the good things about being a lifelong punter is that you get a very hands-on experience of probability, and a even money shot loses exactly as many times as it wins. So all Cats fans out there, $2 currently paying. Every time, if you play that game 10 times, you lose 5 times. So losing comes with winning, Andy. It's the flip to the coin. So, a lifelong time of punting and losing and following Melbourne and losing. It's not like I haven't been in this position before, so I can hold my head high.
Well, I just fired up our Skype where we take our calls from. If you do want to join us tonight, 0390163666, 0390163666. If you just want to vent, you want to ask a question, you want to make a comment, we welcome it all. And I actually noticed, because I always put it out and say you can leave a message, and I noticed that we've got a few messages. I haven't actually listened to any of them, so I don't know. Are you game enough to listen to them without filtering them? I don't know what. One of them could actually be a spam caller because it has a +32. We just go for it. Let's just do it now. I can always, if there's any profanity in it or something, that we can always take it out. So we're going to go in blind to a couple of these. So let's have a listen.
I think it's Luke Jackson's manager is one of them, isn't it?
All right, let's hear the first one. This is all right. Oh, 1 sec. Let's start that again because I got it on mute.
I really value the effort you guys put into the podcast and love the discussion. This is first-time caller but long-time listener demonologist.
There you go.
I really value the effort you guys put into the podcast and love the discussion and also the analysis. And you don't forget your information that you give us about the AFLW and the Casey teams as well. Obviously, last night's result was very disappointing. On the many social media platforms, there was real white-hot anger. There was despair about the second half of the season's fade-outs, frustration about Goodwin and the coaching team's tactics, selections, fitness levels, reluctance to bring in some players, and injuries. But there was also a lot of anger towards certain players, with Melksham, Brown, Spargo, Rivers, Jackson, Fritz, even Sparrow copping heavy criticism. On the other side, there were their ever-faithful and ever-hopeful supporters who feel Melbourne simply need to rest, heal, have a good pre-season, reset, and success should follow in 2023. But in 2022, there was evidence that all the AFL coaches and their panels had put a lot of effort into dissecting Melbourne's tactics and identifying key players and all the opposition teams working towards nullifying our strengths and exploiting our weaknesses. Amongst all this upset, problems, injuries and solutions put forward by others, why should supporters be hopeful for season 2023? Might season 2023 resemble season 2020, not 2021? And what makes you guys hopeful that lessons will be learned? And what do you think are the changes that are needed to ensure we can again make grand final in 2023? Cheers.
Well, there's a lot of questions there that I actually would prefer that we leave. We're going to do a review sort of podcast, in a couple of weeks' time, once sort of the emotion of the loss on Friday night has sort of drained away. So yeah, we will definitely thank you for that message, demonologist. This is definitely, we're going to cover all of that. We're going to cover what went wrong this season and what we need to do next season in our review of this year. So we won't go into that tonight. We did have a couple of questions in our thread sort of pertaining to what we can do to sort of reset for next year, and we will get into that in our next show, which will probably be in a couple of weeks, maybe after the grand final. Big man.
Great call, great questions. Just I'd say one thing is that a number of weeks ago, we were talking about the confidence and my confidence and going pushing towards a flag maybe mid-season, I think, before we'd lost the game. And we talked about 2018 being a year to look to sort of to be careful about, to be aware that, of course, even when you're favourite to win the flag, that you can lose, as Richmond did. I mean, Richmond, by the time they got to the finals, they were shorter than on the odds than Cats are now coming into prelim. So they were like $1.80 before the final started, such as was their favouritism for the flag that year. So that was a really good lesson for these fans to check our expectations, I guess. But the flip is also true. So if we're going to point to 2018 as a year to check our expectations for this year, we should also look to with some look backwards to what they did in 2019, the Tigers, and rebounded that year to come out and win the flag the next year. So just picking up, that we'll go into more detail when we review the season with a bit of distance from Friday night's game. But look, there's a lot to look forward to in short. And Richmond are a good example of what can happen when you're favourite and what can happen when a team rebounds.
So we'll get into some of those other messages that people have left. I'll litter them amongst the other questions and comments we've got throughout the show. But I'll just get quickly from you guys. George, maybe you start. How are you feeling?
Sort of resigned, I suppose, is the fact. We've been hanging on a thread for the last 6 or 8 weeks, and quite honestly, when you look back again with hindsight, we had a lot of games that were where we didn't perform. We've consistently dropped off in games. I think the reasons why we've dropped off should become evident to us when we talk about other things later on in this program. But we've been hanging in there and winning. Game against Carlton was a classic example, but all the same sort of things came to the fore again in this game. All the same things in the game against the Swans. We've had good early leads and dropped off, but I think there's a few underlying things which were beyond our control. But the nature of football is, as Goody has said many times, winning premierships is a very hard game, very, very hard, and you need all sorts of things going right for you. And those things weren't going right for us this year like they were last year. And I think people need to just reflect on how good a run we had last year, even in the COVID situation, with all sorts of things. Things dropped for us very nicely. They didn't this year, but we'll talk about all of those things a little bit later on. But yeah, I think we've been seeing it coming for a little while, and it finally hit us in the face.
A big man, how are you feeling?
I was shattered on Friday night, just totally shattered. And it was a weird game. I thought the energy in the crowd was weird, and it sort of, there was a number of things, but the players played weird in the second half as well, in terms of, there were some really uncharacteristic, mental lapses and fumbles, which were just, that wasn't fatigue related necessarily or anything like that. It just was like I think they suddenly realised that the end was approaching pretty quick. So it was kind of weird. The whole game was a bit weird, I thought, with the whole Queen thing, and then the energy in the crowd was a bit strange. And so I had a bad sort of vibe, just the feeling. I did, like, it was a funny emotion. And I was sitting in the Ponsford stand and had great seats. And so shout out to my mate and friends who I went with. But at halftime, I thought I wanted to go up and sit in the Ponsford stand up the top, to thinking maybe that will turn around. And I just wanted to have a bit of space around me because I was feeling claustrophobic down on that middle row. And so I went up there and I had to laugh because I walked towards where I'd normally sit, right at the top of the Ponsford stand. And who's there but the Fox crew? So Gary Lyon, Nick Rewald doing one of those outside broadcasty things in my bloody spot at the top of the Ponsford. So anyway, I got a seat up there up the top, and that second half, it was just, I know there's a question about when you felt that, so I'll put my answer up for that question now, and is that I knew we were in trouble when we gave up that goal so quickly in that third quarter, and I suddenly had this sickening feeling that from that point on, it was a really, it was a feeling like we're going to lose this match. I had no confidence after they kicked that goal, and I haven't felt that feeling at all for ages, actually. Even probably back to 2019. And so it was, I've been following Melbourne passionately, going to games, started going by myself, when I was 10 or 11. So for me, that loss, in terms of games I've watched and gone along to, that's equal almost to 87 prelim. Not quite, probably nothing's going to come close to that, but definitely equal to the 2018 prelim, which I went to. But it was a different emotion in some respects, because both those games we were underdogs and it would have been a thrill to win, and we were not the better team really in either example. In this game, speaking of bookies, that's 2 games in a row we've gone into almost prohibitive favourites, and so it's a different emotion. And it was. I was shattered. So I came home and watched the Lord of the Rings thing on Prime, and didn't watch the football replay as I had hoped I would be. So it's taken me a while to get my bearings back.
Well, after that 87 preliminary final, I think I was 11 or 12, and I actually cried. And this time I didn't quite, as upset as I was, I didn't have those emotions, but that could be because, one, I'm older, and two, that my MFCSS genes hadn't kicked in back in those early years, and now I've had all the that type of crying emotion pounded out of me. That question that you answered was from Demonized. He asked, at what moment in the game did you think we were in trouble? That is, how early was it? And for me, it was as soon as they kicked the goal with 17 seconds to go before half-time, reducing our 28-point lead to 22 points and giving them that momentum just before half-time. And then I guess it was sealed in those first few minutes when I think they'd kicked 2 goals very quickly. George?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. But what really turned it for me was how easy, when we were 28 points up with 30 seconds to run, how easily they got that ball out of the middle and just walked it through. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, they're stuffed. There was no defence. There was no opposition to it. And I thought, as soon as they
out of the centre, when they took it.
Yeah.
That was a weird. I had binoculars on the that bounce, and Viney seemed to not react.
Yeah,
like it was a weird passage, because he seemed to be expecting the ball to go a different direction and didn't react, and basically let the ball, I forget who the Lions player was who took it out of the centre, but it was just so easy, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was just so deflating, that we'd put in so much work to get to 28 points up, and all of a sudden they're back within a couple of kicks, and then as soon as the third quarter came out, within 3 minutes, it's that just confirmed it was all over, effectively. And again, for the same reasons, they did it so easily, and
the goal that they scored at the end of the end of the first quarter was also just pathetic. Like, it was just terrible to give that goal up. It's my least favourite goal to have the opposition kick those ones right in at the death knell of a quarter.
I think Whispering Jack noted that was it 5 goals that we gave up in the last minute or two of each of the game at each quarter.
Yeah, well, it was the 2 before, one before quarter time, one before half time, one right at the end of the game. I'm not sure if he's what happened in the third.
right at the end. That was directly below me, that lever thing. I just couldn't believe it. It's like after whoever it was, Berry up the other end, wasn't it? Got spun around 4 or 5 times. 720 trip around the G.
And at that stage, I thought Lever had every good reason to complain about that.
Yeah, but that's not what the 50 was for. The 50 was because he didn't give it back directly, and the only reason the umpire paid it was because Cameron was telling him to. It's like,
But what he there was no tackle for a start.
He was tripping.
Well, he put the ball down, sort of.
But you've got to be tackled. He wasn't holding him. And then he had his leg grabbed. Yeah, and the umpires called for incorrect disposal. That's not the rule. And then of course he's going to complain.
The footy gods really made sure they wrung every ounce of emotion out of me, because for a flash I thought, don't tell me we're going to somehow win this game and that tackle wasn't paid. 7 points it was with 90 seconds to go or something. This guy in front of me had his KO to see the clock, so I knew how much time there was to go. I went back down for the final quarter to sit with my mates after my top of the Ponsford experiment didn't work. Wearing a cap, not my beanie, didn't work either. But I thought, oh God, and then that to snuff it out in the end like that was like the footy gods having a laugh at my expenses.
Yeah, just twisted the knife, didn't they?
And to see the Lions, I don't begrudge the Lion fans. I mean, they're particularly the Fitzroy fans.
Yeah, but
they had more.
One of something I saw this picture on social media was 2 people in Fitzroy jumpers crying after the game. It was a photo, and that's hard. And then they go, "Oh, look how much it means to Lions, Fitzroy fans. They won 3 premierships in a row. We still hadn't won one in 50 years."
Well, maybe they hadn't transferred their loyalty to the Lions, and I don't begrudge the fans at all. Like, good on them, but I do begrudge bloody Brisbane Lions team. I hate them. They've got such a pack of bloody dicks in it. Fair income. It's like
they'll get thrashed this week. Don't worry about that if you despise them. All right, let's get into my match wrap up. As much as it pains me to relive the horror of Friday night, this will be quick. Don't worry. Let's get over with it. The match followed a familiar storyline that the Melbourne supporters have witnessed over the 2022 season. It was the 8th time we had held a lead against a finalist, only to fade out and be run over the top of. In round 11, we led the Dockers by 30, only to lose by 38 points. In round 12, we led the Swans by 26 points, only to lose by 12. Round 13, Magpies, 22 points, lost by 26. Round 17, we had a lead against the Cats by 11 and we lost by 28. Round 19, we led the Bulldogs by 27 and we lost by 10. Round 21, it was the Magpies again by 23 and then lost by 7. Last week, it was the Swans by 16, only to lose by 22. And this week, we led the Lions by, as we mentioned, 28 points, only to lose by 13. In total, that's a 339-point turnaround. Frightening stuff if you're a Melbourne fan. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the type of stuff that the MFCSS is made of. It's the genesis of that veil of negativity that pervades the thoughts and feelings. Sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional. Of many Demon fans. And sure, the premiership cleared the air and everything was dandelions and roses. The birds were singing and the angels were playing beautiful melodies on their harps. But performances like those that we've witnessed in the back half of this year, particularly after starting the season 10-0, has brought every Demon fan crashing back down to earth. And now we need to pick up the pieces and work out what went wrong. How did we go from being unbeatable to out in straight sets? And I don't know if you remember that mid-year I had this fear. It was like a fear of success that we wouldn't be able to perform on the big stage and then we'd get all the way to the grand final undefeated and then lose it. And boy, I wouldn't give to sort of be in that situation now. But a massive part of the blame this season falls squarely on our forward line. Once T-Mac went down, we experimented a little with a second tall, but ultimately settled on the resting ruck model, which we've noted time and time again on this podcast has been an abject failure. Neither Max nor Luke have the forward expertise to adequately fill that role, I guess, as a forward. Neither of them troubled the goal umpire much in their time fulfilling that role in the latter part of the season. The need for the second tall was highlighted late in the game when we moved Harrison Petty into the role and immediately we snagged 2 quick goals within minutes. Our delivery inside 50 has been a massive issue too between Harris Andrews, Rich, Coleman, Gardner, Payne. They had a total of 36 marks between them. The Ds only managed 10 marks inside 50. And once again, our inaccuracy early was extremely costly as we should have been up by a lot further, which would make any comeback a bit more difficult. And this is from Oliver Gigatz. I hope that's how you say his name on Twitter. He's an Aussie rules researcher and statsman at AustralianFootball.com. He writes that Melbourne had 8 more shots on goal and lost the match. Melbourne, 29 shots for 11 goals at 38% goal accuracy. Brisbane, 21 shots for 14 goals at 67% goal accuracy. Shots on goal breakdown. Melbourne, 29 shots, 11 goals, 10 kicked behinds, 3 rush behinds, 8 no scores. Brisbane, 21 shots, 14 goals, 7 kicked behinds, 1 rush behind, and 0 no scores. Very, very costly, and it's been a massive problem for us for years, and it really does need to be addressed at some point. The Ds this season have wilted under the immense pressure from some of our opposition, and it shouldn't surprise anyone to know that the Lions recorded a season-high pressure rating of 201 in this match. And B-Man, we've tried to work out what the pressure rating is. We've had it been explained to us, but I can't remember. But anyway, Brisbane aren't really known for their high pressure, and this match was their highest pressure game for them. And last year, forward pressure was a hallmark of our premiership season. Yet this year, our lack of pressure from our forwards has been costly and has continuously been rewarded by a game the next week. The lack of any changes and the rewarding of non-performance has been the bane of many D's fans this season. Making some changes might not have ultimately borne fruit, but the message that it sends isn't great and doesn't motivate those in the team to keep performing to keep their spots. There's been a question mark on our fitness the entire season for one reason or another. We're simply not as fit as we were last season. And despite an almost full list of players available to play, we clearly have many players carrying injuries. And that has most definitely assisted in the costly late fade-outs that have seen us being bundled out in straight sets. Our Rolls-Royce rucks and midfield were comprehensively beaten. Our rucks especially were overshadowed by inferior opposition. Max could only grab 4 marks and Luke Jackson only took 1 mark for the second week in a row. Good luck, Fremantle. Full credit to Harrison Petty. He saved some certain goals, and then when he was swung forward, he created 2 goals in quick succession. Guys, not much more for me to add. We were banged up and perhaps hungover from last season. The same spark was just not there this season. We need to make some massive changes in our structure and our tactics and strategies if we're going to be able to adapt and compete with a competition that was able to adapt and compete with a team that was deemed unbeatable. Go ahead.
Geez, we're headed into the post-season review, Andy. So a bit there. I mean, I don't agree with that last bit that we need massive changes and restructure. I mean, that sort of stuff is not how you go forward. I mean, that's, I know that emotion's high at the moment, but like that's. I don't have a Facebook. I'm not on Facebook, but that sounds like what I read on Melbourne Footy Facebook pages are like. It's like massive restructure, and the other thing I'd say is that there's a lot of emphasis on our forward line. It's been our back line in the last 3, that have been really poor. I mean, how many points have we given up? That's where the focus should have been. The average.
Yeah, but where does that start? Where does that start though? That starts in the midfield.
Well, no, I mean, aside, there's obviously a number of factors, but the focus on our forward line has given our back 6 a get out of jail free card. I reckon. I mean, leaving aside whether banged up or not, May had a mare on the weekend.
Yep.
He cost us critical momentum he had a great game against Buddy, but let's face it, Buddy's not, the player he was. So let's not jump up and down too much. He cost us momentum in that Sydney game. And because of our problems up forward, they're skating. Salem hasn't played really barely a decent game all season. Very lucky to have kept his spot. He was always going to get selected, I guess. But, we really missed Bowie Zip from halfback, I thought. So, Hunt had a poor night. Hibbard had an average night. So I think that the defenders should be well pleased that everyone's talking about our forward line. So again, we gave up. What was score did we give up in this game? So we're giving up. The scores are. That's partly to do with the way we're playing, with the way we played. But I think there are a lot of other issues other than the forward line to worry about. Not least of which is the bloody kicking accuracy. I mean, our foot skills, have not been good for a long time, and that's something I've been banging on about for ages. How many average kicks we've got, and under pressure, the techniques really got exposed again. And there was one that, Viney's kicking's improved out of sight this year. But when I was up the top of the Ponsford stand, I made sure I was directly behind the goal, and Viney was running directly at me, and that goal he missed was just a shocker. It just took all the winds out of my sails, that's for sure. So I was going to say, what does Jackson, Luke Jackson and me have in common, Andy? Neither of us took a mark in the forward line on Friday night, but then you spoiled my gag, Andy, by saying he took one mark.
No.
He took one mark, but it wasn't in the forward line.
Who's that? Jackson?
Yeah.
I was just going to add, look, I agree with pretty well everything that Andy came up with, but I don't think, like Bin Man, that major changes
it was emotional.
Are required.
That was all emotional.
Yeah, that's right. But
it was scripted, Andy. It was like emotional.
Yeah, but based on my emotions.
Yeah. But look, right. Demonland wouldn't exist without emotion. So everybody's, the coach is the worst in the world. All these players have got to be shipped out. All these sort of things. You got to expect that. I think there were three things in this game in particular for me as to why the result came out. And there's never any one reason in a game why you lost a game. It's as simple as that. People tend to focus on one aspect of it, like Bin Man said, be it the forward line or individual players or the coaching or the game plan or something. There's usually a whole stack of reasons that go into it. For me, there were three things. Firstly, there was a dysfunctional forward line. My seats were directly behind the goal at the punt road end, and I was absolutely astounded at the lack of capabilities in the forward line. We've talked about the resting ruck situation. It didn't work again. I was particularly appalled with Melcham. He was in there to perform a particular job, and he simply didn't. I'll talk about the forward line. There was another aspect which, when I was looking through statistics, and it came about because I was looking at the 36 marks that Brisbane backmen took in the game, just an incredible number of marks. And it came across what I think is the reason why they took 36 marks. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on, because one of the questions from one of the listeners is about that. Neil Bullen was given an absolute first-class lesson in how to play football by Daniel Rich. Neil Bullen got, I think it was 7 possessions in the first quarter and 6 for the rest. 6 for the rest of the game. They moved Rich out of the full-back position onto him, and he absolutely nullified him from there and in. And Rich finished up with 30 possessions for the game. So even after quarter time, Rich had 20 odd possessions, and Neil Bullen had 6 for the rest of the game. So shows you what a great footballer Rich is. And remember, Rich was in the same draft as Jack Watts, so he's been around. He really knows how to play football, and it was a great move by Fagan, because it simply moved Rich 50 metres further up the ground, and with his kicking, it just meant the ball was going so much further than what it normally would have. Great player to watch. Improper selections in the forward line. We've been banging on about this for ages and ages. We simply need a Van Rooyen. Van Rooyen should have been in there 6 weeks ago. It's great in hindsight, and I can imagine the football department was hoping that Tom McDonald would come up, but I think we really in fact, I know we really missed that extra tall in the forward line. It was as simple as that.
We just weren't bringing it to ground, were we? I mean, like I said last week, we were playing as if we had a second tall.
Yeah.
And wasn't it? And I know that Jackson, maybe he's banged up or whatever, but he is a forward ruckman, not a ruckman forward. And he has, he's got plenty of time to develop as a forward. He's going to be, a gun. I'm going to be gutted if he does go to Freo. So, I'm not going to be one of these sort of fans who talk him down now that there's talk of him going. But but he's got to mark more. I mean, if he was marking the ball more up forward, then we wouldn't be talking about the lack of a second tall forward.
Yeah, and the same with Max.
Same with Max, but you're right about Max. So Max is not a forward, and he's like he hasn't got a leap. So if he can get blocked, and I mean that's the other thing that was infuriating about the game, and it has been for ages, is Brown is scragged so often. Like at one point, a player had both arms around him, which is normally a tell. And so frustrating when Petty gives, that was there probably, he pulled the jumper or whatever, but after Brown's being scragged, and then it's what happens to Maxi when he's up forward because he doesn't have a leap. Jackson's got a leap, but he doesn't seem to run at the ball into a pack. He's always like that basketball background, George, jumping vertically.
Yeah. And the third thing, and this is no excuse, I think it's just simply fact, was injury. That we've had injuries certainly for the last 6 to 8 weeks that maybe not have been evident, but when the team ran out onto the ground on the Friday night, I counted 6 knee bandages. You don't wear knee bandages, apart from probably Cozzy with his little simple strip, what has been a simple strip under his kneecap. There were knee bandages on the people like Brayshaw. There were knee bandages on Petrarca. There was knee bandages. Who else was there? Fritsch just got rid of one from the previous week. But we also had a player with a broken leg. Jake Lever twisted an ankle in the very first quarter and couldn't run thereafter. But is there anybody who doesn't think that Max and Jackson were carrying injuries? I don't think they certainly weren't performing in the same way that they usually had. And the other telling thing is players who had injuries during the season, Salem is a good example, Langdon was a good example, never quite came back to what they were. And I noted today...
Salem in particular.
Yeah. And I noted today that somebody said there were only 5 players all played 23 rounds. Out of the whole side, 5.
Compared to last year, we had... I think it was 18, something like that played every game, including the grand final. And that goes back to your point, George, is that, everything that could go right went right last year. And I had this sort of image in my mind about this season. It's like the scales tipping and slowly dropping, Tom Brown asked some good questions in the presser, I thought, actually, after game, and one of them was about I forget exactly how he phrased it, but the season's made up of 0.5% that all of these things have to go right to win a flag. And it felt like that, it's like, okay, this little bit, that little bit, the stuff in the mid-season with May and Melksham, the stuff around Bartlett, the injuries, the in-game ones, they all just added up and drip by drip to the scales tipped the wrong way and made it, too difficult for us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I don't think, a lot of Demonlanders have claimed there's a fitness problem and everybody wants to sack Selwyn Griffith tomorrow. It wasn't the fitness. We were fit. We just weren't. We had those injuries which preclude you from running. It was really tragic watching, for example, Jake Lever when Hipwood picked up the ball on the wing and just waltzed away from him because Lever couldn't run. It was as simple as that. And people forget that Lever lost games earlier in the season. May lost games earlier in the season due to injuries.
Lever's twisted his ankle in almost every game this year. At some point, he goes off limping and then comes back on. So, and that happened in this game as well. So that's why he couldn't run.
Yeah. So I wouldn't discount, the death of 1,000 cuts of that sort of thing that was just talking about. It's not surprising. We couldn't run the game out because we couldn't run. So.
I mean, I've got a bit of a different take. I think fitness was definitely was a factor. I mean, but they're intertwined, aren't they? Yeah. Because those injuries weren't just in this last couple of weeks. There is, and there's some really interesting questions that I think that are really worth discussing in that space. And some of them relate to things like the resilience and what Andy was saying before about not picking fresh players and, things that are against the normal way of in footy that has caused so much angst. Last year, it all worked a dream. So I think that, it's a bit simplistic to be blaming Griffiths because you don't know. Like everything, as I said, went right last year that could go right. So the resilience was never tested last year. I mean, this year it was tested, and they could point to the strategy being that philosophy working last year. Well, fair call, but it sort of got tested under a lot more difficult conditions this year, and it probably didn't pass the test, did it? So,
No.
And you don't know what's going. You don't know what we know. We know those injuries above. That's obvious. You can see them. Just you can see how players are limping. When we went to that training run, you could see Cozzy before that game was hobbling. He was the Thursday before for the game, but you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. Remember when it turned out Jonesy basically had a crack in his one of his neck, a bone in his neck for pretty much a full season in 2019, I think it was. Those stories will come out as the sort of summer.
But then in hindsight, like with Cozzy, should he have had a week or two off then? And I know you can then we might not have won and been in the position for top four. But
look, that's why I think that. I mean, that's why I think fitness. So there's a question from KLV about the loading, and we might as well get to that.
Well, let's give him the proper credit. I'll read it out. Read out his question now. I've just got to find it. KLV. Okay, he asks, what does Bin Man think about the loading theory? We consistently look cooked after halftime in the second half of the season, yet Goody insisted in his post-game presser that our players were fit. Is our problem psychological? And Bin Man, you've hung your hat the entire season on this loading theory. Where do you stand on this now?
So a couple of things. One, I think a presser, what's Goody going to say? So I think we can disregard him because if you're going to take that on face value, well, then you also take on face value that he earlier said and was adamant there was no issues with getting ahead of themselves. There were no psychological issues. So, but there was in this game. There was certainly some psychological issues at the end. They played, rattled. In terms of the loading, is that I think that there's two things that are potentially conflated here. So my confidence about our performance and going on to win the flag was predicated on the loading working. So it's not a theory. Loading happens. So my view is, and this is where the absolutely reasonable debate, it was the major factor in our mid-season form slump and will be again next season. So I put that on the table last year. And to be clear, I put it on the table before this mid-season happened. So it's not and last year. So it's not as if I've come to this party, just recently. The loading was also a factor in our current form. It's a science that is a really difficult thing to do, obviously. It's difficult for an elite level athlete at the Olympics who's only got one person to worry about and a coaching team all around that person to peak at the right time for an Olympic medal. Imagine the complexity of 40 elite athletes trying to get it right with all of the variables that are in place. So all of the variables, the injuries, incidents, the fact that we had less time over summer, the fact that we had a bye this year and didn't have a bye last year before the finals, any number of variables make it incredibly difficult to get right. So the analogy I would use is baking a cake, like a 6-month cake, is that you put all the ingredients in, you're confident that it's going to taste great, but for whatever reason, you put the temperature wrong or whatever happens is when the cake comes out of the oven, it doesn't taste like you expected it would. Now, you don't know until the cake comes out of the oven because you can't take it out during it. So I would argue that it was a major factor in our form slump, and I would argue that it's a factor in our inability to run out in the last 5-6 weeks, or in particular in the last 3 weeks. The program didn't work for whatever reason. We weren't fit. The whole goal is to be fit. All of the teams are doing it. The other thing that I absolutely got wrong is I underestimated how fit and running over the ground, the Pies in particular, and to a lesser extent the Swans would be. The Pies were, that was commented on. I watched that game. Their ability to run and cover ground. That's what they were getting. They were getting those free players free forward of the ball. That's what happens to us when we're running over the ground. So we lost our comparative fitness edge over other teams, and the Pies fitness program have done a brilliant job of getting to them to the level they are. Same with Swans, but just a caveat on that, there's still 2 games to go for one of those teams. So they may well fall in a heap come grand final. So it's inexact science. There's no guarantee that's going to work. That's the aim, to get it work. But as I said, there's 2 issues there. There's one, loading happens. They didn't get the program right. I'm with George. I wouldn't, you can't lay that at Griffith's feet because we don't know all of the variables. We know some of them, and it's an inexact science at best. It's a science, but an inexact one with lots of variables. 2, my confidence in the fact that we would come good and that our fitness would get there. That's what my confidence in us performing was predicated on that. That's what I got wrong, obviously. And in hindsight, you speak of hindsight, George, is for me, lacking fitness and being banged up was absolutely the biggest factor in our inability to play first, 4 quarters and play to the end. And I've been pondering the reason for the significant change that we play since the Dogs game. I've talked about it on the podcast since then. My theories about why we've changed our game, and I would say it's a pretty significant change to the way we play, revolved around Goody looking to add another layer to our method, because we were looking to take advantage of our predictability, perhaps by being unpredictable. Goody has said a number of times that tactics evolve in a season. The quick ball movement method that the Pies and the Swans was proving effective, so maybe he was looking to counter that and to bring some of those ways of playing into our game. Other teams definitely, as demonologists pointed out, found ways to mitigate our strengths and expose our weaknesses, as Goody also touched on in the presser, looking for his comment about vulnerabilities. And that he was doing all of that, those changes, moving the ball quickly in particular and going hard in the first half to get out to a lead. That's what it felt like, would increase our chances of winning the flag. So that's probably true. But I didn't really apply the Occam's razor to that question. And really, as I said, my confidence for winning the flag was predicated on that training program having us in optimal shape for the finals, and that just wasn't the case. If I had applied Occam's razor, all of those points that I just made before might have some validity, but I would have arrived at the more logical conclusion why we went out so hard to get match-winning lead and then looked to hang on in the second half. Goody must have known. He has all the access to the injury and fitness related data, obviously, and all the metrics. He obviously knew we were too banged up or lacking in fitness to play 4 quarters. I'm convinced that is part of it. I mean, that's obviously hindsight as well, but that's, that should have been in my thinking about why we were playing the way we've been playing in the last, and why the second half fade outs. I think that we looked to get a match-winning lead in the last 5 games and then looked to hang on for dear life in the second half. And we almost did. And to be fair, if we'd kicked accurately in half of those games, we would have won them. Like people will forget that when we look back in time about going out. We should have beaten Sydney. We could have been 6-7 goals up at half time, but how many times have we said that this season? So, we could have snuck on through to the prelim. So, with you, Andy, we probably would have struggled big time next week anyway. But yeah, that's my take on the loading stuff.
George, you want to add anything before we get on to some more comments, questions?
No, not at this stage. I'll just come back to the you can't be fit if you're injured.
Yeah. So exactly,
as simple as that. And I, like Binman said, I don't think we'll know the true extent of the injuries, but for me, there were too many obvious injuries. Like I said, even from the knee bandages that were there on the game, and those that happened during the season. 2021, that simply didn't happen. We had a full fit list, and it was quite deep as well. So,
and you can't flog your whole list if you've got injuries during that period you're putting in heavy loading. That means some players aren't going to be able to put the loads in that are going to get them to optimal shape come finals.
Right.
We were super fit in the first 10 rounds. In the first 5 rounds, we were playing, we were covering the ground. We looked better. We'd had the pre-season, but we weren't in the second half. So,
and of all the injuries we had, really Langdon's with his ribs was about the only one that wasn't associated with legs or feet during the whole season. And most of them were contact and collision type injuries that you can't do anything about. But when your legs
except rest them, and we certainly didn't do that. And that begs the question, why? And why didn't we, is our depth not as good? We've got a question about it later.
I think that's what we'll get to, and I think that's exactly the answer to that. As we tried, there was no replacement for Tom McDonald.
Another factor, though, I think, is that the club put a positive spin on it, as they would, of course, about how tough our run into the finals were, and the spin being that this is great preparation for a tough finals. But we played. The Dogs were up and about when they played us, but really the Pies game and the Blues game, and also the Brisbane game, but the Pies and Blues game in particular, were as closest to a finals intensity that I've ever seen. As I said on the podcast, that were a tough, and then head into the finals and play Sydney. So to play Pies, Blues, Brisbane and then Sydney consecutively, and the way they attacked us in all 4 games, the opposition's pressure rating was over 200 on that scale you're talking about, Andy, which is phenomenal. That's crazy. That's the average is 140 or 150 or something on that measure for a game. That's going to take its toll physically, isn't it? So, we were clearly banged up and running out of steam. You could see it.
It'd be interesting to see what Geelong perform like this week, given that they've had a relatively easy run in pre-finals as well. So,
and had a good run with injuries. And I've said this a million times on the podcast and elsewhere. For me, the biggest determinant for final success is, number one is injury, and not far behind is fitness. And that's fitness is particularly even more so as football's evolving into an elite running sport almost. I think it's been there for a while, but the way Collingwood cover the ground and Melbourne cover the ground too when we're at our best is phenomenal to watch.
All right, let's get into our first comment from today. Is a message from our mate in Kongwak. Kongwacker says, Andy, George and Bimman, commiserations on our finals results. I normally would say unreservedly I am looking forward to the podcast. However, if others feel like I do, I wonder what you are in for by way of contributions and questions. I am sure your reasoned and balanced views will prevail again. I have refrained from knee-jerk reactions, and some 60 hours after the result have tempered my thoughts and tried to. However, my disappointment and anger does not want to subside, no matter how I try to rationalise this semi-final result. Football is an important fabric of this city. It has grown from tribal, municipal roots into a national game. Trust is a key component in relationships, right down to the seemingly benign football club, football members, supporter relationship. We would all like to barrack for, support or belong to a team we trust to consistently put in good effort week on week. It took a long time to begin to trust my team and club again after the Barassi exit and the Smith sacking, but gradually that trust returned in the Norther years. It waned again in the up and down Danaher years and returned again in the middle part of the magnificent 2021 season, culminating in the never-forgotten finals campaign and the glorious premiership. The Goodwin years showed an alternating mix of good promise, only to be dashed by games like the 2018 preliminary final. The following year, 2019, as some sort of internal rationalising/cleansing, I referred to the coach as Simon Badloss. It was fitting. In the early COVID years, I was not convinced by his game style nor his media appearances, which as uninformed members and supporters was all we had to judge the team and club by, and of course each week's games and results. While 2020 saw improvement, the finish to the season was unsatisfactory and dispiriting. The 2021 wonderful and uplifting final series was followed by players and staff expressing a strong and united desire to repeat the effort in front of members and supporters on the MCG in 2022. The manner of our dismissal from this final series has left me angry and disillusioned. Maybe the signs were there and I refused to remove the blinkers. The first 10 wins of the year, I thought the coach/team had applied the handbrake once we got in front. Why? The Stephen May restaurant incident had me flip-flopping between boys will be boys and is there some disquiet within? After the round 22 Carlton game, I posed the question, did anyone see what I thought I saw? Many of our top liners were walking with peculiar gaits, i.e. not moving very freely and looking injured. It wasn't seen in play, but walking off and back on at half-time, three-quarter time, etc., and away from the ball in game time. The very issue that stamped our authority in 2021, competitiveness, coming from behind to win and running out games, disappeared in the second half of this season. Along with many others, I had faith, blind faith, that we would come good when we needed to. Not even the qualifying loss to Sydney and the manner of it interrupted my blind faith. So now this 60-year MCC/MFC member is back to being a doubter, and my trust in the team, if not the club as well, is back where it has been most of my supporting life. Does that make me fickle or a new realist? I have the off-season to work it out. On any judgment, the last half of this season does not sit well alongside the previous season and a half. I feel the club owes its members and supporters a briefing on the results of a fact-finding report on what went wrong and what will be in place to ensure 2021 was not a one-year wonder. That might go some way to restoring trust. Now let's get something out of this season and barrack home our Casey team next week, hopefully rediscovering team spirit and resolve and unearthing some solid up-and-comers for next year in the process. I do look forward to the analysis and discussion tonight. So our mate Kongwak, he wants the club to do a bit of a fact-finding mission to what went wrong. Big man, you sort of explained a little bit of what might have gone wrong in the last bit.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, we're all feeling pretty, not great about going out in straight sets, basically. But I mean, I got to stand up for the club there. I mean, I feel Conwacker's pain, that's for sure. But the boys never stopped trying. Like it was only in that last quarter when there was some rattled players that they looked rattled. We collectively can't all come to the conclusion that we're banged up and struggling and we weren't, looking in great shape. And then, like for me, I haven't lost any trust in the club whatsoever. The club's in great position. Of course, we want to improve and get better over the pre-season, but nothing that the team did or, the coaching staff did or, of course we can question it, but nothing there that's happened this year has caused me to lose trust. Not like it did. I mean, come on, let's be serious. We finished second and we've gone out in straight sets, but like it wasn't that many years ago. We weren't worrying about going out at straight sets. We were worrying about going out of the competition. That's not that long ago. Like really, I mean, I started posting on Demonland in 2010, 2011, it was the Neil years and not long after that. So we're not talking very long ago when we were, we would have loved to go out in straight sets because it would have meant we'd made finals.
I think the analogy with that you made before with Richmond in 2018 would have been the same. The Richmond supporters were ready to burn the place down after winning the premiership the previous year. Look what happened to them. So the challenge is really there before our players now to prove that, in fact, like Kongwaker said, it wasn't a one-off. So, but we finished second this year. You don't get to be second without some capability, some serious capability in the competition. I think we've got, again, if everything falls into place, then we should be up there and challenging seriously again next year.
Yeah, of course. And look, if you take it as a given that there was banged up and we weren't fit enough for whatever reason, whether they got the loading program wrong or you don't believe in the loading at all, or whatever the case is, and you're looking at it the way we play our footy, well, you can't. It's a bit like, you can knock our second halves, but you can also go, well, we were in front. I read an incredible stat on Demonland. I think Titan Uranus posted. I don't know if this is accurate, but he wrote that we were 11 points up, a minimum of 11 points up in all 24 games of footy we played this year. So that's incredible. Like, has that ever happened before in a season of footy? I mean, we had leads at a lot of half time. So obviously something was working in the first half. I think Junior Mack on Demon Lane made a good point that, that you can't discount the impact of the opposition coaching staff coming in and changing things at half time and mitigating things we've done well in the first half. But nonetheless, whatever, to be leading often at half time means that something's going right with the way we play footy.
Yeah, my problem isn't that something going right. I acknowledge that. My problem is the going wrong. But as we've discussed, the banged up
kick straight. If we had
well, that's
that's
a big thing
players
too.
Who could kick to at least average. I mean, I've been talking about this for years. We have only got We've got 3 players who are above average, I reckon, in terms of kicking skills, and we've got probably 7 or 8 below average AFL level, and it's come back to haunt us all season.
Yeah. Amsterdam D's fan says, no question from me tonight, but just wanted to pass on immense gratitude to everyone involved in making the podcast. It's been brilliant again this season. Thanks for that, Amsterdam D fan. It's really nice to get some positive feedback. And if you really want to help out the podcast, the best thing you can do is go to Apple Podcast or whatever podcast app that you use, and leave us a 5-star review or leave a comment. That helps more Demon fans find the show when searching for D's content to listen to, and would really appreciate the assist. And D Old Fart says, not a question, but I want to acknowledge the huge amount of work that Andy, George and Binman put into the running of the pod each week over the season. Whether or not I agree with the points of view, I value the different perspectives and love the Demon banter that goes with them. Thanks from me, guys. And I expect I also speak for a vast majority of Demonlanders. And thank you, D. Old Fart. That's, I guess, the thing about this podcast and Demonland in general. We aren't all going to share the same opinion. We don't always agree with each other. Our hosts even don't agree with each other at some time. And we're not by any means experts, and we don't purport to be. And anything that we pontificate about on here is just our opinion, and we're not saying it's our way or the highway, and that's why we open this podcast to calls and comments and questions from our listeners. We want to hear everyone's views, and I guess that's the whole point of the demonland.com forum. It's a place where we can read the views of others and I guess chat with people who aren't our significant others, whose eyes glaze over when we come home from the footy complaining about how we were robbed by the yellow maggots, and if only we'd just kick straight, like you said, Bin Man, I wouldn't be in such a foul mood. But enough about my life. Let's move on. Engorged Dungan says, a sincere well done, guys, for doing this pod. I'd be calling in sick if I was a presenter this week, and I was saying to the guys earlier that I've been totally divested from footy over the weekend. I couldn't look at Twitter or social media over the weekend, and just looking at a photo of a Lions player or a Magpies or Cats or Swans jumper made me physically ill. I couldn't even bring myself to watch much of the KC game or the AFLW game. I watched snippets of each, but I was just sapped emotionally of anything footy, and I was dreading doing the prep for this podcast tonight, but I managed to pull myself out of the funk for you, our loyal listeners, so you're welcome. Just kidding.
Andy, when you say you're divested of footy, does that mean you've sold all your shares?
Everything is sold. All my merch, all my premiership merch, it's all gone, all out the window.
It's better than the divestment that you were threatening to do the other week. Well, let's go to one of our other voice messages, and I reckon the next one we've got here is from our good friend Terence. He's in Belgium, and I believe the area code is a Belgium number. So let's hear what, or maybe Terence, or maybe a neighbour of his has to say. Let's get me off mute.
Oh, hello, Andy. George and Binman, this is Terence from Belgium. I was hoping that I might get an opportunity to call live today, but I'm picking up a house guest from downtown at the time that the podcast is happening, so I probably won't be able to do that and probably be listening towards the end of the day. Anyway, I'm hoping that there will be another podcast where we do a deep review of the year. I think that would be really fascinating. I wanted to make one comment that not only the gut-wrenching of the losing, but the stake in the heart that was just punched in a little bit further when you look at the results of our game on the Friday night, where 79 points was a losing score, compared with the game on Saturday, when 79 for that other team that will remain nameless, 79 was a winning score. So I really hope this year that we would have been able to separate ourselves. Having won the grand final last year, having won 10 in a row, I thought this was the year that we would really separate ourselves from Collingwood and really show them who was the superior team. Little was I to know what the outcome would be. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Look forward to being able to call in when you do a review of the season. Good luck, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Terence, and we will be doing a review in a couple of weeks, and we'll get everyone's sort of questions and comments to make, and we'll figure out how we're going to do that.
Terence watching the game in Belgium, his neighbours must have been thinking a bit weird for the French national anthem blaring away from his telly.
Well, and we started off with the English national anthem for a start as well. So,
Yeah.
Watson11 says, still can't believe Brisbane beat us. Would love some discussion on why the G is such a bogey ground for us against good teams. And this is interesting. Since Goody has been coach, we have had 4 wins and 21 losses against sides that finished top 6 that year. Is it psychological, or is our game plan fundamentally flawed and too easy to pick apart by the best teams on the wider ground? P.S. Please don't roll out the myth that we play Optus Stadium well and it's the same width, because it isn't. It's 130 metres wide versus the G's 141 metres wide. Big man, you said you had something about that you wanted to say?
No, I was going to say that we play well at Optus, but
does anyone have any ideas? I have no idea.
Maybe I've got no ideas.
No.
Yeah.
We
I
can't
cannot help you whatsoever. I was astounded when I saw those statistics. But it has been a factor that's occurring. I don't know whether there's any reasons behind it other than sheer utter luck or bad luck. But yeah, it is very strange. When they talk about making the MCG a fortress for Melbourne, well, at the moment that's certainly not the case. So,
how many of those games, Andy, were we 11 points up?
Well, probably some. That's only been a phenomenon of the last year. How long's he been coached? 2017. What did we win? Like 11 wins that year or something.
Well, we had a heartbreaking
and the Collingwood
related end to the season.
Lost that one. So it'd be interesting to have a look, because the wins are only the ones against top 6 teams. It's not doesn't count those bottom teams. So we probably have won quite a few at the MCG, but they're against lower teams. So yeah, it probably is something.
I mean, I guess what's our record against top 6 teams generally in that period would be. You'd need to know that to compare.
Mind you, we're just going on Watson's. We're trusting him that those stats are correct, and I'm not saying he's wrong, but I didn't fact check him. Let's move on. Yep, unless you got something.
No, I've got nothing.
Okay. All right. Gibroni says, looking forward to tuning in despite our season being over. It's still hard to comprehend. Some observations on why there were no selection changes would be great. And can any of you comprehend, George, you might want to answer why we didn't make any changes this week. In fact, we didn't really make any changes throughout the season. You said we should have brought in Van Rooyen, tried him out a bit earlier. Look, we did try... after T-Mac went down, we did try Wiedemann, we did try Mitch Brown. None of them work, and then they did go the model. But we certainly didn't really try to change up our small forwards who might not have been performing. We didn't make changes with injuries, as we've noted.
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer in a way, but there's this sort of contrast that you've got to constantly make between having the reliable, safe, same players playing week after week together to get the success that you're seeking, but just as equally, I think as part of the club review, I'm sure they'll do this. But we only had Turner come in this year as a first year player on the list. We had one player blooded for the whole year. That, of course, in a way understandable given that you're a premiership side with good players in there. But I would have thought that there should have been some more opportunities presented during the year. Van Rooyen has been simply fantastic at Casey and hasn't got his chance. There's a number of other players who seem to have been left particularly in the medi-sub role for weeks and weeks and weeks on end.
And Bedford's a funny one, isn't it? Because he didn't do anything particularly wrong, and we really could have done it. And Chandler's in the same boat. Just particularly at the end of the season, we really could have done with that zip for both of those players, really.
Yeah, and given the forward line situation, we tried Wiedemann in there. That was an abject failure. But why didn't you try Van Rooyen in there? There was nothing to lose at that point. Maybe it was because they were hoping T-Mac would come back earlier than expected. But look, I really don't know. There were some glaring needs. I also have a strange feeling that Goody might have been looking to give the opportunity to players like Hunt and Melcham to play in a final and a grand final. I don't think that worked particularly well
that's gifting.
Well.
That's almost in the gifting territory.
I don't. Maybe, but why wasn't Boat?
But Hunt had played. He didn't have a great game on Friday night. But he wasn't Robinson Crusoe, was he? So,
no.
So, the other factor, it's an interesting one. It's sort of like I was touching on before. It's a philosophy that Goody has, and it's like when it worked last year. Well, you can point to the success. It hasn't worked this year. It goes against footy, normal way of doing footy, doesn't it? In terms of like, if you look at Scott, the way I know he's got an older list and all of that, but Beveridge is probably a better example. He moves his players in and out of the team a lot. When we were needing the spark, the thing that not having Smith, for instance, come on, and even in this match, they could have taken anyone off who wouldn't have mattered. Like that question a few weeks ago that we had asking about our use of the medi-sub. What's the point of having him? And like Smith, we needed some energy in that second half. We were running out of petrol, and so surely that's when you're staring down the abyss. Isn't that when you break glass and bring your medi-sub on? So, but the other factor, George, it goes a little bit to I know there's a question on this one, Andy. I think 15 to 25. A point you've made a number of times this season is questioning the depth of the players at Casey. Like apart from Van Rooyen, who's really going to be?
I'll ask that question now because I'll give the guys their due. They've asked the question. We had Trackman ask, why is Goodwin playing out of form players? They're playing for Casey. There are players playing for Casey. This should have been in a month ago. George has sort of outlined a few of them, and then BW511 says, I'd like to hear your thoughts on our depth. Are our 15th to 25th players good enough? We've had a lot of strong reasons to bring guys in through the back half of the year, so Goody must not think so. I'll get... sorry to interrupt you, Ben, but I thought I'll give these guys their due.
No. I don't know about that last bit that he doesn't think they're good enough. I think it's more his philosophy of minimising changes.
Yeah.
That was... I think that's... I don't...
But do you think that's flawed? He obviously doesn't.
Well, as I said, it wasn't flawed last year.
No.
It's been shown up this year, hasn't it? Like I would have loved to have seen Van Rooyen in. I was amazed they didn't. I was positive they'd bring a second tall in. I think there's a caveat to what I just said. I think it's obvious he doesn't think Wiedemann's good enough because Wiedemann is fit and is tall.
Wiedemann's playing as a ruckman. He's playing as a ruckman, really.
Even if I know George and none of us big weed fans, but we do have a 6'4", whatever height he is, extra tall forward who's played, 40, 50, 60 games AFL footy. So, I'd say Goody obviously has stamped his papers, hasn't he? So otherwise, why wouldn't he have brought him? But for the others, I don't think that. I mean, I think the depth is a bit of a myth in some respects. Is all teams 15 to 25 players? I mean, are going to struggle at the senior level. That's why they're not the team. I think as we said earlier in the season, gone are the days when you got Michael Tuck playing nearly 100 games of reserve footy before he gets a senior game of footy.
The other thing was, I think when you really look at the Casey players who were available, probably Van Rooyen being the exception, who else would they have brought in? Chandler and Bedford.
For some speed, but then who comes out?
Exactly, that's exactly right. Where do they play? At Casey, they're playing virtually in the midfield. Laurie was the same situation. The only ones who are perhaps on the fringe were Turner and Tomlinson. Well, really, apart from one or two games, Turner did come in when was needed earlier on in the season, and Tomlinson did the same as well. The holes weren't in the back line, apart from those one or two games. So who do you bring in?
We could have thought outside the box. You could have brought Tomlinson in and thrown Petty in the forward line, and we saw in 2 minutes that was a little bit of a success. I mean, Petty, though, look at what he did during the game.
Tomlinson
he did two amazing saves.
Well.
We just didn't sort of try any out of the box
almost a full season. He played almost a full season, I think 2017 as centre forward, maybe not a full season, but at least half a season at the Giants in 2017 as centre forward. So he could have at least crashed into packs down there. And
it's not even the crashing into packs. It's also that along the wing, that mark along the wing, because a lot of the times Ben Brown would go up there and maybe he'd take a mark, maybe he didn't, but then there was no Ben Brown down in the forward line.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So.
But I still think there is a deficiency at Casey, and you really look across on the whole lines, and you go, even Bedford and Chandler, are they going to be prime, A grade type players moving into the AFL? Can't really see that.
No.
And you look across the rest of the Casey list, I don't see too much.
And Laurie's still. He's still on the rise. He's got plenty of time, hasn't he? So but he's not going to come in and change. I mean, Bowie back there is the one that probably in hindsight that I would have loved to have seen in that team. We really needed his zip and we needed his kicking off halfback flank.
Absolutely.
It was just our kicking off half. That's why I think the forward line get a bad rap, because it wasn't just our poor defensive work. It was how rubbish our kicking was off the halfback flank, and how many times did we not hit a target, or and that going aggressively through the corridor. People love to watch it, but I reckon 50% of the times we've tried it this year, we've given up a goal.
It actually worked in the first quarter. We played quite aggressively through the middle, and it was working. They obviously sort of countered that after the first quarter.
No, we just didn't take our chances.
We didn't. We definitely weren't taking those risks later in the game. Oh My D's says, and we've answered this, but I'm going to give Oh My D's as their due for asking questions. It's 2021. We had a dream run of injuries aside from Tomo's knee, Viney's foot, and Langdon being concussed. 2022 has been a total nightmare by comparison. According to the AFL Tables website, only Brayshaw, Fritsch, Petrarca, Spargo, and Jordan played in all 23 rounds from 33 players used. You mentioned that before, George. To what extent did injuries to key players and those carrying injuries contribute to our end-of-season fade-outs and our lack of cohesion amongst the playing group? We've answered that one. Eva D says, hi, Demonland, first-time poster and love your work. I have no doubt there will be many different theories for our very disappointing end to 2022, many of which will have some merit. However, surely it all comes back to fitness and the fact that we weren't fit enough to be able to execute our game plan that won us the flag last year. Keen to get your thoughts. Well, I think we've sort of answered that one. I heard one commentator say on the weekend that it took opposing teams about 1.5 quarters to work out that they couldn't long bomb it to our key backs, therefore went short and at angles, which is why we kept getting overrun. To me, that is the biggest load of rubbish I have ever heard. Instead, in my opinion, it took 1.5 quarters for Melbourne to tire and no longer apply the pressure and overlap to run and carry out of our game plan, and that is the main reason why we kept giving up and not just the leads, but decent ones against quality teams at that. Also keen to get your thoughts on that. The season to me proved that our best is still probably the best. However, we need to be one of, if not the fittest teams in the comp to carry out our game plan for the whole season. I believe the combination of a premiership hangover, not doing that extra 5%, a botched fitness program and injuries, especially carrying banged up players, is why we struggled so much towards the end of the year. Silver lining is that they are all easily fixed with a bit of luck with injuries and some smart recruiting/trading, and we'll be back up raising the cup at the G in 2023.
Just on some of that stuff, and I mean, I think there's some really good points there. The only thing I agree with everything except for, I think that it's way too early to say that we botched the fitness program. I think that we weren't as fit. That was true, but like as I said, it's a incredibly complex thing with so many variables at work that I think it's unfair for people to be pointing the finger at Griffith. We just don't know. So botched is a bit of a strong word, but I completely agree with everything else, and in particular the comment about teams working us out. Suddenly a quarter and a half in, they can work out how these are AFL elite things that what they suddenly come to round 18 and go, oh wow, haven't watched any of Melbourne's footage this year. They play in a particular way. You know what we'll do? We'll make some changes now. Why wouldn't have they done that at the beginning of the game? Like give it, So I think that's exactly right. Fitness, and the other point is that, and I made this point, of a number of times, is that that the post is right, is that our game plan is completely predicated on being really, really fit, because it's so much the wave running that happens, that moldable overlap running. And that's when we generate our scoring power. So it's also how we defend. And if we haven't got that ability, that's why we've been giving up so much scores, because we're playing higher risk footy, so we're going to turn it over, but we're not being able to spread and block the corridor, for instance. We just couldn't stop the corridor. Like if you compare that game to the Brisbane game in the first half in round 23, they could not get it through the corridor. They were waltzing through the corridor in the last quarter. So some good questions there.
I think maybe we will go to. It seems we've got 2 voice messages from the same caller. So let's have a listen.
Hi guys, this is Nell from Biden. Love the podcast. Question I wanted to ask the boys in regards to 2022 is a sort of multiple phase question. I feel this a lack of fitness has let us down. Do you think Selwyn Griffith has basically not got the same plans that our previous fitness coach had, who we're solely missing now that he's in Adelaide? Do you think, number 2 is my question, that Goody was too stubborn to introduce players at the back end of the season to help our forward line? Because I think our kicking this year, the goal is atrocious and has really let us down. And probably, we could have won the last 2 games if our kicking was straight, probably the last half of the season. Do you think that Goody should have tried different options, like a Kay Chandler, like bringing in T-Mac that just a little bit earlier to take that risk if we wanted to go all the way to win that elusive flag, and even JVR? I know they're young, but they need to learn how to play in the big time. And number 3, what is everyone's opinion on the year? And do you think we'll learn from it? And finally, number 4, do you think Goody over the season, Sana will revisit his strategy and plan to have multiple options if
Well, he ran out of time then on his thing. Now, Noah, if you rewind about 10 minutes, we did answer some of those questions for you. That's the problem. I didn't get time to have a listen to our voice messages, and I usually sort of structure all the questions sort of in an order. So apologise for the repeats there. But the rest of the questions... go ahead.
One thing, Andy, I'd say is the about Burgess is that one thing. I think it's unfair to compare them. Like as we've said, everything went right last year, and I can't remember if I said this before in my spiel about loading, but we didn't make the finals in his first year. Like, so, Burgess is no magician. In 2020, we didn't make the finals, did we? So, like, he didn't come in and magically change our fortunes. So I think let's hold fire on our fitness team. But one thing that I do wonder about Burgess is not the fitness aspect, actually. It's the psychological aspect, because he, I wonder whether we've missed a little bit his coaching on the bench that he does, and he's talking to the players. And, a lot of players seem to have a really strong relationship with him, and everything I've heard about him and listened to him interviewed and on the podcast he does with Brookie, that podcast, he's very much a people's person. And, that aspect, he is like another coach in some respects. So I do wonder whether we've missed that element, but I don't know whether, that maybe that's unfair on Griffiths, so maybe he does those things as well. Just the other thought I had was that all of the Demonland posters and others who could never quite handle Goody's throwaway comment that they weren't going to review the 2018 prelim would have been thrilled to hear him say that, they go away and review this game. So I'm pretty sure they'll review it.
Well, Noah did have, and let's see what he, in his follow-up message he had to say.
Bryden. Just the last question was, do you think Goody over the summer will work with his coaches to develop new strategies during game time, an A, B, and C? So if A doesn't work, they'll try option B. And the second question was, do you think Goodwin this year was too stubborn to take risks and try other players for our forward line, because our kicking is atrocious? So the Cade Chandler, JVR, and wanted to know your opinions. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Love the potty. Noah from Bryden.
Thanks, Noah. We had answered the other one about the that, but do you think they will? You said they're going to review. Hopefully they do come away and they do make some tweaks and changes. They've got to. I mean, I don't think they can just say.
I reckon Goody's destined to frustrate Melbourne fans, because I can't see. I mean, of course he'll make some changes, he'll make tweaks, but there's going to be no babies thrown out with any bathwater. I mean, he won't radically change his philosophy about the game. I think that, it'll be interesting what they take from, let's see what happens for the rest of this season. But, the incisive way that the Swans and the Pies use the ball and go through the corridor is a different way of playing, and it's counted us. But you need excellent kicks to do it. Like, that model is no good if you've got players who turn it over every 50-50. It's just no good. That Collingwood's model is completely predicated on having Dacos down on halfback flank, for instance, being able to hit targets laterally, and Pendlebury and
side
bottom, exactly. They've got brilliant elite kicks, and so without those players, yet that model doesn't work. And the same goes for Sydney. Sydney, as I said before, the Sydney-Melbourne game, they've got some elite. Goulden is one of the best kicks in the AFL. They've got, McInerney. They've got 6 or 7. Not McInerney, is it McInerney? They've got 5 or 6 elite level kicks. Blakey, who's an excellent kick. Even Buddy is an excellent kick, field kick. So I don't think Goody's going to be changing anything radical. Will he? Will he bring tweaks? Of course he will. I mean, but much will depend on who we can get into the club. Like, like what players we can get in, and we'll probably touch on that. Or certainly in the review we'll touch on that.
Singer asks, is it time to bite the bullet and hire a full-time forward coach who actually played in the forward line and understands forward craft and leading patterns? Well,
I'd rather get some forwards who understand forward craft.
That's true, but you do need someone who's going to marshal them. And I think it's time we went out to the market and got the best forward line coach available, preferably someone who's had maybe experience under a successful coach who has runs or goals on the board, someone that can bring some new ideas and different forward craft to the table. Now, that doesn't mean we have to get rid of Greg Stafford. No doubt he's an excellent right coach. I just think we're a bit exposed in the forward line this season, and we can't. And look, it might have been that personnel issue, but I think we can't afford to start 2023 the way 2022 ended in terms of our forward liners. Look, it's not all the forward liners we've sort of worked out tonight, but yeah, I think we don't need that.
I'm very loath to go down that path simply because our forward line was completely dysfunctional from the players' perspective. You can't blame the coach for these sort of things. And Greg Stafford may well be the best forward coach in the whole league.
Well, look at the grand final.
We don't know. we don't know. Yeah, we don't know that because of what the forwards were producing this year. So the other failing, everybody thinks, let's go out and get a Dermot Brereton or a Wayne Carey as the forward.
I didn't say those guys.
No, but this is what the argument always finishes up being. And you go, well, if they're any good at that sort of job, they were great as forwards, but they're not employed as that these days. So,
well, didn't we
only have to hear Dermot Brereton talk to know that he's going to struggle to communicate messages to anyone?
I think Wayne Carey's free at the moment.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I'm keen to ask him where he buys his crushed Panadol.
I think it was Voltaren.
Voltaren, was it Voltaren? Crushed Voltaren.
Yes, allegedly.
Allegedly, it was. Well, what are you alleging otherwise?
Lazy did have a question, and I apologise, Lazy. I won't ask it there. You did have a thing about asking us questions about our forward line issues, whether it's personnel structure, strategy. I think we'll leave that, and we'll do that in the in our season review because.
Except, can I say, Andy?
If you do have something, so yep.
Personnel, like in terms of that's obvious for me. It's got to be our number one target over Summers. I mean, we've got Van Ruin coming through, but you can't expect him. T-Mac is not going to be our saviour when he comes back in. I mean,
no, and he's pushing 30
at his age,
30 plus as well.
Well, and with Liz Frank injury at his age, at his height and weight, there's no guarantee he will get up next season. Brown is carrying this injury for the rest of his career, is what Goody said earlier in the season. You might remember. We need a really elite full forward. In the chat room, there was Demonic points out that one of the good comparisons to 2019 Tigers would be if we went out and got a player of the ilk of Lynch. And as much as I can't stand Lynch, but he certainly.
Daniel McStay is available. He's linked to Collingwood, whatever. Why aren't we sort of... I don't know if he's the answer, but we should be throwing... If we're not going to keep Jackson, then whatever money we're sort of asking him, let's try and get a forward if we can.
Yep. So personnel, of those three things, for me, the biggest problem is personnel, because you can change the other things, but if you haven't got the players, you can't. That's very difficult to change.
And I think that is the most important thing. And in this game, I spoke before about the 36 marks that the Brisbane backs took between them. That caused me to wonder why that had occurred. And I simply looked at the height of the players that were in the back line compared to Brisbane's. We did not have a single player who was taller than their opponent in this game. Not a single player. And what's worse, they had three players who were 8 to 16 centimetres taller than their opponent. So when we kick the ball in there, they're always going to be outmarked. And they were 36 marks. We had 3 set shots in the whole game. one of which came from Petty in the last 3 minutes.
Good
What does
mark,
that do?
that too.
Yeah, it was a great mark.
Fantastic
Yeah,
mark.
but
What was that? A pack mark in
Yeah.
that forward
Yeah.
line of Melbourne's?
Yeah.
It was
That's
so
why
unusual.
people have been wanting him in the forward line, because he can do that.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
why you want a JVR in the forward line. You need another tall up there. You can't go in with a small set of smalls like we did in this game. They were simply outsized, for want of a better word. So, yeah, we need another forward in there. We probably need another two forwards, in the sense that, like Binman just pointed out, T-Mac is not going to be as useful as he has been in the past. He's really struggling at the moment. You only had to see that at Casey on the weekend. Ben Brown's struggling immensely.
Yeah, but Ben Brown's struggling, I think, because he doesn't have another big body to sort of protect him.
Well,
I think,
that's certainly the case.
And he's still going to struggle with that knee. Like
Yeah,
he was looking.
Oh, he
like
can't run.
was
He can't
flagging
chase,
anyway. He can't jump either.
Yeah.
And Van Rooyen, I'm totally on the Van Rooyen train, and I can't wait to see him play AFL footy. But the thing about him is that he's like a Schwartz-sized player, and he's going to be a dynamic player. We need another really genuine tall.
Well,
like
would you play? Would you play? I mean, as fantastic as Petty has been in defence, he's saved goals. He takes amazing marks. Would you play? Having seen that pack mark and that goal, and that doesn't make a great forward. Would you consider putting him there and maybe using a Tomlinson or one of the other guys, Disco Turner or someone, to try them in defence? And I'm not saying they're going to be make up for Petty, but if we can't get someone in a trade, or if we're just going to draft a Cadman who they're saying's a forward, and we might not even get him, if we can't get one of those guys,
we got to bring someone in through the trading. We've got to do it now.
But who's that? Who?
I don't know. I'm not the draft guru in around this joint, but I don't know. But we need to bring in like a McStay.
Yeah,
he's no
that's why.
But someone.
No, but he can take a mark McStay. He can do that blocking.
Or lob,
anyway,
that's actually a good comparison to what Richmond did, because Richmond in 2017 won with a modified small forward line. So the sort of similarities quite eerie. If we go on to win the flag, I'm going to bookmark this one.
Well, that question we didn't give Lazy the due. He asked
just to give a little bit more insight about. Because I was stuck behind the goals, I also loved watching the Brisbane forwards in action, particularly Charlie Cameron. He was simply amazing.
So dynamic.
He turned, and it wasn't Hibberd that was the problem. It was the other players who were around. Binman, I know what I'm talking about. The old pick and roll. He did an absolute gem, at least on 2 occasions on Hunt, where he'd run directly at Hunt, then he'd run around Hunt, and Hibberd was right on his tail, and Hunt failed to do the handoff. And all that happened was that Hunt became actually a block for Hibberd, and then when he tried it with Coleman became the second block when I think it was that first goal of Charlie's in the third quarter, when he ran into the open goal square, simply because he was smart enough to execute it, and Hunt was not smart enough to do what he was meant to do. People don't see those sort of things in action, but it was just brilliant on his behalf, and he did it a couple of times in the game. So, yeah, you need really smart forwards, and you need tall forwards.
If you were sitting behind the goals at the city end, were you, or the other end?
Punt road.
Punt road, right. Well, I was at the Ponsford Street end, obviously, so saying that. Oh, sorry, Ponsford stand. And the wheels Cameron had to mark that ball in the pocket was just fantastic. And I was looking at that thinking, there's no way he's going to not get this goal. And it just, I was on that angle so I could see it, and it split the middle. So, it's like we don't have that sort of pace up forward, and we don't have anyone. Cozzy maybe, but not even Cozzy in this game, where I'd be so confident that he was going to kick it. It's just he's a terrific player, Cameron.
All right, and finally our last voicemailer. Let's see if we don't get
it's voicemail bingo, Andy.
Yeah, it really is tonight. So apologies if the question has already been asked and answered, but let's go. This is. Got to press play. That would help.
Hi guys, I've got 2 thoughts on our second half of the season decline, which I thought I'd share with you while I'm walking my dog. First one is defence, where teams worked out if they kick it around our key tools, they can get it in and score pretty easily. We don't have a great defence apart from those key tools intercepting, and if you can get around them, you're pretty much home free. And the second one is when teams are defending us, notice that they all move to a one-to-one defence. Notice that first in the Carlton game, something they never usually do, and of course the Brisbane game as well after half-time, with I think the theory being that you concede that you're not going to win contested ball and clearance, but if you can pressure the next possession, the post-clearance possession enough, the Demons won't handle the pressure and they'll turn the ball over. And the other bit of that is if you can slow us down enough, our weak forward line is exposed. Most of our scores last year come from these sort of quick ball movement, turnover game that teams were very successfully shutting down. Anyway, just two thoughts there around our declining form. Love to hear your thoughts.
I reckon they're good points, Andy. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, about the turnover? Because, I mean, that's our bread and butter. And in the last third of the season, we got killed on turnover. Sydney, I'm not sure of the turn. I didn't look at any of the stats or
I think I saw it on the scoreboard at one time late in the game. They had 7 goals from turnover. We had 3 or something, I think.
Right. Well, I mean, that's just completely arse about. Yeah. But again, I'd put the caveat on it is that if you accept that our game plan is based around our running power and that the model, the way that the method that Goody talks about is based upon that, then if you don't have that for injury or fitness related reasons or for whatever reason, psychological, then the game plan doesn't work. So, it's like that idea of other teams working us out, of course, there may be an element of that. Goody talked about our vulnerabilities being exposed and teams going to work on them. But it's a bit like, as I said earlier in the season, you can't judge a Formula One car when you put just normal petrol in it. So, you judge it when all of the conditions are perfect. So, I guess that raises the question, is the game plan, if it requires that level of fitness and, to work, then maybe there's some flaws in that game plan.
Or the flaws are the components that are required to execute the game plan. And that's exactly what Goody said in his press conference, that we weren't able to execute when needed, and that comes down to the players.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point about going slow, definitely post-clearance. I think, and it's like other oppositions know that we've got rubbish kicks in our team too. So you pressure the kicker and will force turnovers. But, we just weren't getting multiple players to the contest, were we? Like, it was so different to how it looks when we're at our very best.
And don't discount as well our best extractor of the ball, Clayton Oliver, was tagged out of the game.
And by all accounts, a broken cheekbone. He was another one that injured coming into this game from last week.
And I reckon Viney was as well. He was very ordinary.
He was very ordinary
by his standards.
And there was a really interesting comment on Demonland relevant to that. Is our top 5 or 6 players were banged up, and the question, I think it's a good question, is, I mean, maybe this is true of all teams, so that do we over rely on our best 5 or 6 for us to be at our very best? But I guess that's true of any team, isn't it? But
all right, well, let's I think we've talked enough about the Brisbane game. Casey waltzed into its way into the VFL Grand Final, easily accounting for the Lions by 51 points. Previously, the Lions were the only team to beat the Demons this season. Tom McDonald with 20 possessions and Jacob Van Rooyen both kicked 3 goals, whilst Chandler and Dunstan had 25 possessions and Bowie had 23. The Demons will face off against the Southport Sharks at Icon Park at 2:30 p.m. on Sunday. Earlier in the season, Casey defeated the Sharks by 30 points out at Casey Fields. I only watched bits of this, so I can't really commentate or comment. You didn't watch a second. George, you said you didn't watch much, so I guess there's not much to say.
Yeah, it was the bits I watched. The game was really all one way. Apart from, I think the first goal, Brisbane got the first goal, but from there on in, it was all Casey. We just had too much talent across the whole system, and what I was really impressed is with the Casey players. The listed Casey players like Munro and that they just White. They just put in so hard, so much good work in the middle. It's not surprising the ball went up the other end. Van Rooyen had a party. T-Mac had a good game, although he's still not moving all that well. Brown even contributed a couple of times. And Bowie off the halfback line was just superb. So it'll be interesting coming up against Southport. They've got, I think they said 16 players who were all on the Gold Coast list previously. So they're all about 24, 25 who didn't quite make AFL level, but they're all playing down at Southport. So and Southport have been up near the top of the ladder for the whole season. So probably the two best teams are certainly playing off in the grand final this week.
Is T-Mac playing? Is he eligible? What's the story?
I don't think he is. I don't think he's allowed to under the rules.
You could play in this game, but not the grand final.
Not the grand final. You can't. Yeah, you can't.
Because we were playing.
Yeah. So,
okay, right, okay.
Yeah.
And Southport's interesting. You'd know more about him, Andy, being basically a
Gold Coaster.
But they're massive. It's a massive club, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like basically Queensland footy revolves around Southport. They've won something.
Yeah,
they've won 1 and 2 flags or something up there, like the Port Adelaide of Queensland footy.
Yeah, they should have been the Queensland second team. Strong support, strong financial base as well. They've got their own leagues club. So they're very strong side.
Will you guys go?
Yeah, I might go down. My nephew really wants to go down, so
Icon Park's Princess Park, is it?
Yes, yeah.
Right.
That's the downside. It's still ordinary.
It's
always
not
has
easy
been.
to park around there. So.
Or go to the toilet or get any food.
Then the other match was the AFLW. The Demons blitzed the Saints in the first quarter, kicking 6-0, but then failed to score another goal for the match, piling on 9 points as the Saints slowly clawed their way back. But still, I think the D's were, what do we win by, 20-something points in the end? Or
My one good footy story for the whole weekend was I watched that first quarter and nothing else. That was the only. I didn't watch any of the Casey game, and I watched that first quarter and then turned it off. So my one observation from that first quarter is that I think I'm in love with Westy. She's just fantastic, and she's just improving, like out of sight. And she was dominant in that. I think she had. Maybe I've got this wrong, but I think I heard the commentator say she had 11 possessions in that first quarter. Maybe that sounds a bit too many, but
that was correct. Yeah,
she was unbelievable, and she just stands up in the tackles. She's using the ball really cleverly now, and she's a left footer, isn't she? But she seems to catch out the players. She jinks to maybe she looks awkward on both feet. I'm not sure, but she moves laterally really well. One step sideways, and I thought she was fantastic.
Yeah, she's a very powerful player. And both her and Liv Purcell weren't there 2 seasons ago. They've made a huge difference. And the other one in the midfield who's really come along and did so in this game as well was Tyler Hanks.
She's such a natural footy player. Who's the forward? Is it not Cunningham? The blonde woman who kicked a couple of goals.
Fitzsimons.
What's her story, George?
I don't know off the top. I think this is only her first season. I'm not sure, or she might have.
Yeah, Or
might
maybe
have
she
not got
played
a
last
game.
year and not injury or didn't, but
Yeah,
she
I
looked
can't
at a
know.
good pair of hands, clean
Yeah.
hands, and
Yeah.
kick straight, which is and Zanka, at least from the first quarter, I saw Zanka look pretty dominant as well. But
Yeah, I think they moved Zanka into the ruck to make her do some more because she's been completely at sea in those first two games. Didn't seem to get involved at all. They moved her more into the ruck in this game, and also then dropped her back into the forward line and made a huge difference. She just seemed to get her hands on the balls a lot. What was interesting was that we were missing both Maddie Gay in the back line, injured herself during the week, and Sinead Goldrick is still missing from the back line, but hopefully both of those will be available this week. We're playing Brisbane out at Casey. Brisbane are top of the ladder, but unfortunately I saw tonight both Jordan Ivey and Taylor Harris have been offered 1 week suspensions for unduly rough play, effectively, for both.
oh, really? I was about to say with Taylor Harris that I'd rather she come into the forward line than Weed, for instance.
Yeah, well,
she flies at the ball aggressively, doesn't she? She's frightening.
Nothing in her path is a hindrance to her. She's just fantastic. But yeah, our mids are just enormous at the moment, which is, we saw it in the Adelaide game. That's the level that you've got to get to be able to play a potentially premierships. And we've got three of the best, and Paxman being able to play her on the outside with a long kicking capability is a real bonus. Previously, we had to play her in the middle because we didn't have the depth in the middle. But now
she seems really suited to that wing, for that space. She did some really clever things in that 1 quarter I watched.
Yeah. So 6 goals, 1 in the first quarter, and 6 goals, 10 at the end of the game. So.
One thought I had was it was great to see a game at Moorabbin. I know that they've played some games there in the, I have fond memories of going to Moorabbin as a young fella.
What, to the disco?
No, never went to the disco. No, to on the train out there to watch the D's. I saw Plugger kick 12 goals one day.
Yeah. And standing on the outer wing with your ankles up to your ankles in mud.
Yeah, well, I was a young fella, like 10 or 11, and in that part of the ground, I forget what they called it, like the animal
enclosure. Yep.
That was an eye opener.
All right, boys. I think that's where we're going to leave it for this week. Thank you to Demonised, KLV, Conwacker, Amsterdam D's fan, D Old Fart, Engorged Onion, Jabroni, Watson 11, Coach, Trackman, BW511, Oh My D's, Ever D, Singer, Lazy. Thank you to our voice messages, Demonologist, Terrence, Noah, and our anonymous one at the end there. Thank you to my co-host, George, and B-Man, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. We'll be back. We're not going to be back next week, but we'll be back in a couple of weeks. We'll do a season review and a post-mortem, and hopefully put this season behind us as we prepare for a successful 2023 season. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.